Hello and welcome to another episode of Faith Talk, where we talk all things theology, religion, and life's tough questions. I'm Oliver, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Payton.
I'm so happy we've gotten that intro down.
Yes.
It was a tongue twister for a while.
Finally.
We've gotten it.
There, yes. And today we're joined by a very special guest, one of our close friends. Super cool dude. If you haven't got to know him already, you should do it. But here we have Justin Taina.
One thing that's cool about Justin, by the way, is that the if you haven't gotten to know him yet group is very small.
Yeah.
Because they're so social, pretty much everybody knows you, and that's really cool. So this is gonna be a good one. I'm excited about this because we've had a lot of guests who agree with us. We've had a few that have disagreed with us, and this one isn't one that's like agree. This is much more of, I think, a useful discussion. So, Justin, why don't you tell us about what you believe? I know you and I have talked about this a lot over the last, I'd say, 2 years, and the conversations have gotten better each time.
Yeah, I'll admit. Yeah. Where would you like me to start? Or do I just go where I...
Go ahead and start with your worldview on the base level. That's normally what we ask.
So, with a lot of people, my story begins with my parents. Mm-hmm. I feel like for both of my parents, it'd be best to start with my dad. My dad grew up Seventh-day Adventist in Peru, which you may or may not know is majority Catholic, like 95%. And he recalls growing up not being like singled out all that much for being Adventist, but it was a little odd because like they'd be let out on Fridays to go to Mass and stuff like that. And it was a little odd for him, but he doesn't look back at it with like much, I was persecuted for this. No. And my mom, she was raised Buddhist in Vietnam. And not get super much into her life story. She lived a very hard life, but after restarting from scratch basically twice, and just to give an example of that, she had to raise 2 kids on her own in California while not speaking much English. Mad respect for her. I love my mother. But she met my dad in community college, and evidently she converted to Adventism, and whoop-de-doo, a few years later. So yeah, that's a very basic rundown of my parents, but that doesn't talk very much about me now, does it? So when it comes to my worldview, like, just it's very obviously been influenced a lot by just Adventism.
Sure.
Whether like just the like core values instilled in me, and just me trying to figure out, okay, do I actually agree with this? Do I see this as helping me help others? Like ... But also with my family, because on my mom's side of the family, with the exception of my mom, they're all Buddhists.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me. Every time we've talked about that, I'm like, I want to know more about that.
I can talk about it in a sec, but that's a unique influence on me. But then from my dad's side, he comes from the Peruvian, South American tradition of Adventism, which I will be very honest with you, is very distinct from American Adventism. And like, just like growing up in the church, I'm like, like compared to what my dad, like this is very unique. And just growing up, it was very weird seeing like it was very tight-knit community that I was supposed to be a part of. I just never felt fully integrated into it. I'm like, dang, I'm at church, like just gotta sit through this couple hours, say hello to the old people and head out. Oh, happy Sabbath though, can't forget that, very important. Just to sum it up, just from a quasi outsider but not fully, like it's very ritualistic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I can kind of relate to what you're saying there, because for me at least, as a child, I was always forced to go to church every Saturday morning, and that part of that is the reason why it's kind of like, for now, church is just kind of like, to me, because ever since I was a child, it's always been forced on me. So now, naturally, if something's going to be forced on you, you're not going to like it as much. So.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot, and that's something I'm very strong in my opinion on, is that almost that you do what you want. I'm not going to force it on you, because every time I've seen someone forced to do something like that, they grow to distaste for it and they dislike it because it's been forced on them. Whereas for me, like to use the Sabbath as an example, my parents were much more relaxed, and even though they always encouraged me to treat the Sabbath the way that typically you treat the Sabbath as an Adventist, it was never forced on me, and now I do it willingly and happily because it wasn't forced on me. And it really bugs me to see when someone's been hurt by the opposite of that.
I gotta add something about my parents. Like, I don't think I specifically mentioned it, but they were very laid back when it comes to, honestly, parenting overall. That's a completely separate topic. But with religion specifically, like, yes, I went to church, but like they didn't just bring up to me, you're a Christian, you must do this, or like that. And like just on Sabbath, like I could I just did what I usually did, and like they didn't bring it up.
Yeah. That's actually kind of interesting. So, because I think in my conversation with you, your parents were pretty laid back, right? The things you experienced were more from the church directly, and maybe going into a church school as well. Because to keep this in mind as well, the three of us grew up going to Seventh-day Adventist education. Oliver and I from kindergarten onward, you from first grade onward. Yeah. So we've known each other for like 12, 13 years and have been in Adventist school the whole time.
And it's the Adventist bubble, baby.
Yeah.
Another thing to add on to that whole church thing is like once you're forced to do that, it becomes a chore. Like it's a routine now. You I gotta wake up, get ready, go to church. I got that done, check it off my list. It's not something that you do for enjoyment or to worship, which is what church should be. It becomes a chore, which adds to the reason why a lot of people don't want to do it now, because nobody likes doing their chores.
That's a real problem, and it's something that I have to look upon it with grace for all situations in this conversation, because when people raise their kids in the Adventist bubble, which is a very real thing, as you just said, they don't do it like intentionally. They're like, I want to make my kid hate these things. They want to make their kid love these things, but they don't realize what they're doing until it's too late, and that's what hurts. That's the sad part about it.
Yeah, I was going to bring a couple of things. Like, just one thing I hear from, like, a lot of my peers around me, like, they couldn't read anything. Like, a big example, their parents would, like, absolutely not let them read, like, Harry Potter,
right.
Magic. And I'm like, bro, who cares?
Yeah.
And I'm like, seriously, like, I just never understood that. Like for me, I didn't read it because, like, I just wasn't interested in Harry Potter. Like, I read, like, other stuff. But then, like, when I hear people with their parents, like, oh, they didn't let me watch that, or they didn't, like, I'm like, we're Adventists.
That's something that I've seen a lot. I've had lots of conversations where people, and I always point back to the fact that people let you down every time. Something interesting, though, about Harry Potter, actually, I thought I'd bring up is kind of fun, is Frank Turek, the apologist I've talked about a few times on this channel. He has a book coming out called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. And he talks about all these film franchises that we talked about. Many of them are those franchises that a lot of strict Christian Adventist parents won't let their kids watch. Sometimes Star Wars, all the time Harry Potter, the Marvel movies. And he takes all those movies and is like, he's totally against what you just described of like, you can't watch Harry Potter. And he uses these stories to actually say, hey, these actually point to Christ. So if you were raised in an environment where like you weren't allowed to watch any of this stuff, I'd encourage you to read this book because I think it's going to be a good one. I don't have it yet, pre-ordered it, but it's interesting. That is something that you see a lot. I actually never watched Harry Potter as a kid either. My parents really didn't let me. Thankfully, I didn't really want to, and they did let me watch things like Star Wars. But yeah, that's rough, especially like you described. You didn't understand why.
And like just growing up, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. My parents don't do that. Okay.
And that's something that's not just within religious households. That's in households everywhere.
Yeah.
Super strict parents, it's a thing. And what tends to happen with that is as the kid grows up, he's been conformed and refined, and he tends to become more rebellious.
Absolutely.
And so what's excuse me while I find my words here. What you'll tend to see is that they'll become more rebellious, and the kids who actually had less restrictions as a child, they tend to be more of the, I guess you'd call them rule followers or whatever. But they tend to be more laid back and more respectful and all this and all that. It's kind of interesting how that works out.
Yeah, this is interesting. I didn't expect this conversation to be part of it, but this is important. Yeah.
I feel like we should move on from this.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was. Yeah.
So why don't you just kind of introduce what you want to talk about today?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Justin Taina. Like they didn't mention the last name, I don't think, or maybe
did we not?
I think I did.
Maybe.
I honestly don't
I
know.
forgot. Anyhow, but yeah, just like I'm here to just share. Like, oh yeah, I'm me. This is my worldview. I have my gripes with Adventism I'm still working with, and just trying to find my place in the world.
Yeah, that's something. Before we get into this conversation. Like you just said, your gripes with Adventism. That's something that's really cool about this podcast. We are inviting you here to share your problems with the church. You don't see that very often. There needs to be a place for conversations like this. I feel very strongly about this. These conversations need to happen. Because if people have a problem with the church, they have a right to share those problems. So that's why you're here.
And I'll be completely honest, like if it was a couple of years ago and like I didn't know for a fact, oh yeah, these are my buds right here. Like, if I did this, I'm like, oh, I might get canceled by the church. Holy crap. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that you feel that way, because as a church, that shouldn't be how we make people feel. Our goal as Christians is to always make people feel that they're loved and that we're accepting them or welcoming them into the church.
Yes. Yeah. And unfortunately, we have failed at that time and time again. But then that always goes back to, we will fail. I've failed 1,000 times. I know I've had very personal conversations with you where I've apologized for how I've dealt with things. And it's always about how you and I will mess up every time. But when we point back to him, he doesn't mess up. So as we go into this, keep all these things in mind. There may be people who watch this and are like, how dare you let someone bash the church that way? I'm like, no,
okay,
this is an open space.
Buddies, if you disagree with me, I mean you no ill will, but I'm just sharing my opinion. If that makes you angry, why do you care?
Yeah, just stop listening, honestly.
Very explicitly,
I would actually encourage you to listen, though, because that's the thing, is that I encourage everybody to listen to people you disagree with, because it'll help you be a better person for that. So, go ahead.
Okay, first off, the whole, in making church an inviting space, that is a spectacular discussion I could get into, but, I feel like I would like to expand the just Adventist bubble and just how that relates to me.
That's really important, yeah.
I mentioned earlier that my mom's side of the family is Buddhist. That implies that they're not Adventist, and they're not. I have 2 half siblings, and they each have kids, and that's been the source of lots of my exposure out of the Adventist bubble. I'll be completely open here, and just talking with my sister with everything of just growing up Adventist, being in high school, and going to college outside the Adventist system. That's what I want in my life, because just the Adventist bubble is all I've known, and it's been disappointing in many aspects for me.
Yeah. No, I think if you're in the Adventist system, and I think a lot of people listening to this very well might be, take notes on this, because what you just expressed is that you've been in the Adventist system for 13 years, and instead of wanting to continue your education in Adventist University, you want to leave. That's notable. That says that we've made mistakes. The people in the system have made mistakes, and that includes all of us, I think. So, this is really, really important conversation, and you and I have had in-depth conversations about this beforehand, so I know what you have to bring to the table. So, take notes.
Okay, but that's enough about me. Let's get into the topic of making church an inviting space.
Making church an inviting space, yeah.
Yeah, there's many things I could say about this. I'm gonna go with I have notes here for a reason, I know. I got nothing. Sorry. Wait, I will in a second, but right now, nothing's popping up in here.
Well, yeah, no worries. That's the cool thing about this casual conversation, right?
Right.
But I know we had a bus ride. To give a little background on this, you had expressed you wanted to be on this podcast for a while, and then we ended up on a bus together for. Actually, ended up being more like 9 hours.
Yeah.
Driving to the other side of the state, and this stuff started to come up. And what we discovered was that you and I had talked a lot about the problems you've had with the church. But then this conversation was cool because you presented a lot of solutions. And that's kind of what I was hoping to bring to the table here is your solution. So the Adventist bubble, for instance, what are some of the things that we talked about that could be more inviting for people to come into our churches?
Well, just from my... that is a very tough to throw. Anyhow, again. But... Do I go with the biggie first off?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. I hope this isn't super big news, but for me, I'm not straight. That's me. And growing up Adventist, it hasn't been the most inviting space for that, and that's a very big understatement, and I'm going to highlight that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to name it.
This is the quintessential issue.
Homophobia.
Yeah.
It's a very real thing. I haven't had the horrific experience of someone walking up to me, you're going down to the bad place with the bad man. Yeah. But I know for a fact that if I go unsafe and whoop-de-doo, I just did it now, it may happen. So yeah.
Yeah, this is the conversation. We have not had a full episode dedicated to this. We have touched on it a little bit here and there. But I've ended up talking about this a lot because it gets brought up so much. And to especially the youth out there, those high school students, this is a big topic. And there's a lot of things I could say here. And again, I'll use my words carefully because what people say matters. Like you just said, if somebody goes up to you and says that, like I've said before, and I'll say it again, none of us have the right to say who goes to hell and who doesn't. That how in the world am I supposed to know the state of someone's salvation? That is not my business at all. So when someone does something like that, they're being a hypocrite, they're not presenting the true gospel, and they're hurting the church.
God never calls us to judge. If we think back to the story of the prostitute, and they were stoning her, and then Christ comes up and he says, "He who hasn't sinned, throw the first stone." And what does everybody do?
They leave.
They back away.
And they say that Christ wrote on the dust, and many would believe that he was writing the sins of those men who were trying to stone her. Because, like you said, he doesn't call us to judge. He calls us to remove the speck from our eye so that we can better be equipped to help our brother with the log in our eye, so we can help with the speck in our brother's eye. And it's the key for me, because you'll hear this all the time. If I present, I have pretty biblical traditional views, and that's why you and I have had some rough conversations here and there, right? So in that, sometimes I'll get told, "Why are you judging me?" For me, what's helped me understand, am I judging it? Am I doing something wrong? Is being judgmental is different from making a discernment. And sometimes you can come across as judgmental, and it's really hard to address, especially this issue. So I pray that all of us as Christians can do better, so that you don't feel the way you felt in your experience, because those experiences are real, and the church has made mistakes.
Okay, I have one thing to say. In reference to, all of these issues, and, I can list them out, and I'm going to do that. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, blah, 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 blah. Insert your adjective you so wish. Why do you care?
Yes. So this is where you and I have had some rougher conversations. Like I mentioned earlier, though, something I'm grateful for is that our conversations have gotten better over time. But for me, you and I have a very different worldview and different personalities too, and I think that plays into it. So the thing of why do you care? A lot of Christians, like I mentioned, kind of with the parents who raise their kids super strictly, they do it. They really think they're doing right. Most of the time, not all the time, and you can disagree with this. I think most of the time when people say something that comes across as, you use the term homophobic, it's because they think that they're worried about the person's salvation, and they worried about the person. Unfortunately, often we don't go about that correctly. And I think that this issue is relatively new in the sense, not new that it's never existed, but new in that it's been more, more open, and we've talked about it more, and people haven't known how to deal with that. So it's something that, I still believe what this book says, but it is hard to know how to deal with that in today's culture. And people have been hurt, and that is a huge issue.
I think it's kind of interesting too that we focus that type of behavior on this specific group, right, and we never really see it happen to any other people for specific sins. It's always this one specific sin. It's like, why is it like that?
It's a huge problem.
I was gonna say this, my sexuality, to me, it's such a minor part of my character and personality.
That's
if you're gonna hone in on something on me, if I'm hateful, if I'm severely impatient, if I'm yelling at people, you can focus it on that. That I'm perfectly okay with. But why do you care about who I like though? Seriously, it's not your problem, it's mine.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because like you just said, it's not the most important part of your character, because sometimes that has happened, right, where somebody does allow something like that to be their whole personality. So then when someone like me comes along and in a respectful way simply voices a view that I think is biblical, then they feel like I'm attacking their character, because once you allow something like that to be everything, then it's really hard. So it's good to remember that when someone simply disagrees with you, it doesn't mean you hate the person, right? And that's really important too.
Well, the thing is though, a big part of the reaction to people say this is the Bible says ... is you can't automatically know if they're coming from just whether you're going to the bad place or just you don't know, or in your case what you're doing. It's I can't make a generalization, but for me at least, it's a defense mechanism. It's just not quite a knee jerk, but it's oh, this again. Okay, buddy. It's.
So go into that again, because I'm trying to understand what you're saying. So more specific, I guess.
Just the reaction of automatically assigning as hateful. It's a defense mechanism. At least that's what it's been for me, and I can't make generalizations, so I'm not going to. But I think for a decent amount of other people also.
Okay. Yeah.
It's interesting that once we find out something about somebody, we classify them by that.
Right. We put people in groups.
You could be friends with somebody for 10, 20 plus years, and then they'll come out to you, and then suddenly, for whatever reason, you'll view them as a totally different person.
As if you haven't known them for 20 years.
As if you haven't known them for 20 years,
Right.
but they're still the same person.
Yeah.
It's just you've learned some new information about them. It's like,
And
yeah,
I'll admit, like talking about this with my parents, it was very stressful. Like, I sat on that for years, and I'm like, yeah, Dad, you love me. Like, there's something though. And when it actually happened, there were tears from both parties. My mom was looking at us like, you both are idiots.
You can just imagine your mom doing that.
And
your mom is wonderful.
yes. And we had a discussion, and it boiled down to, like, I'm your son. This is me. I'm still the son you know, like a son you raised, and ... Like, this shouldn't change anything.
Yeah, it's, I find myself, I praise God that I find myself choosing my words more carefully when it comes to this issue, because I could sit here, I think probably 2 years ago, I would have just started launching into a full-on, like, bringing out everything in the book. But, as Christians, and those of you, there's going to be people listening to this, hopefully, on the polar opposite sides of the spectrum on views on this. Hopefully there are Christians listening to this who agree with me, and hopefully there are Christians who listen to this who agree with you, and we can both gain something from this.
Okay, Payton, just like as a comment, like if I was this confident in like who I am, and you, like I mentioned this to you, and that's how you responded, I legitimately would have like found something to throw at you and never talk to you again. So.
Yeah, exactly. And please hear that, right? Those of you who are Christians who hold to the same views as me, don't present it that way, because it's not doing what you think it's going to do.
Well, and then you have to ask yourself this question: what do you achieve in doing that? What do you achieve? Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. In fact, it drives the person away even further.
Yeah.
So now you're at a point lower than you were to begin with.
It's often described as church hurt. But it's, again, I have to go back on the grace aspect for both sides, because I really, truly do believe, knowing from kind of experience and knowing these type of people, most of the time, it's not malicious. Sometimes it is. But often, it's not intentionally malicious. And it can get to the point where it comes off that way because you feel so strongly about it. But either way, like, actually, there's a verse in I believe, Romans, where Paul says, whether their motives are false or genuine, the message being preached is the same. Whether someone's motives are false or genuine, the reaction of the person is what really we're talking about here.
But I feel like that was like a good amount of time devoted to that topic, though.
Yeah, no, I think that this expresses the point that there's the problem. Now let's talk about the solution.
like stop focusing on it. Like,
So that's what you say is the solution. Stop focusing on it.
like that's not me saying the church would just like completely ignore, but I feel like just like a definitive statement from on high is just like, you may disagree with it, but there's no space for hate in the church.
Sure.
Like that do wonders.
So so you would suggest literally just like have the church as a whole put out a statement, or
Yeah.
okay. So see that's something I like about this, is that that's feasible, right? And I think what's crucial is make sure is that the compromise aspect, in the sense that we're not compromising any values by doing that.
Like it's
You're
literally
saying-
saying
yeah.
there's no space for hate. That's
Sure.
like one of the most like Jesus things to say.
Yeah. It's like what Jesus said, neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more. He could have stoned that woman. He was the only person on the planet who could have stoned that woman, and he didn't. And we, the church, are supposed to be his hands and feet.
But like also like it can't just be a one-time thing. It has to be a continual thing.
Sure. His action. Yeah.
Like I mean like by continual thing I mean like consistent thing and like yeah, that's kind of that.
Would you describe it as a change in attitude, almost?
Like not just a one-off thing, but also like less of those gays and more of like yeah, them. They're cool. Or not, maybe not they're cool, because, but you know what I mean.
Well, I get exactly what you mean, right? We're not saying, and we talked about this a little bit with Kabanji when he was on the first episode. We're not saying you have to go and outright promote it, because obviously that's going to make the church uncomfortable, and I don't think we should do that. But you don't have to promote it in order to show love, and you don't have to, this does not have to be a complicated issue. We can do what you're saying and still hold to the principles that I believe. There's no middle ground.
I have one comment I need to say, though. Every single time the phrase hate the sin but love the sinner is mentioned, I want to scream.
Yeah. Have you heard that phrase used 1,000 times? Yeah. I think we all have. I think it's one of those things where it was used for a long time. People didn't realize the reaction people were getting from it, and then it became a common use thing. And I think it's time to phase that phrase out. because it just causes too much hurt. Again, that's something we can put into action, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a Christian, I'm not telling you to compromise your values, right? I stand firm in what I believe. I'm not changing a thing, but I'm changing how I deal with it to more effectively spread the gospel, which is the most important thing. So maybe it's time to put some of those phrases away and learn to deal with this differently.
So at the end of the day, be respectful to everyone.
Yeah. Jesus was respectful to everyone.
Like, vibe and let vibe, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why can't we all just like chill on an island somewhere,
Bro.
drinking out of coconuts?
Yeah, exactly. Coconuts.
Yeah.
Just like eating pineapple.
Just chill.
That's the other thing too, is that I said Jesus respected everyone. He did. And look at how he dealt with different people, right? The people that you could say he was quote unquote disrespectful to, I wouldn't describe it that way, but the Pharisees. Like, if you're comparing this issue, the LGBT issue that we talked about briefly, Jesus didn't attack people unless they were being outright hypocrites. And guess who the hypocrites in the situation are? It's the church. So we shouldn't be attacking people. We should be realizing that, hey, we're becoming the Pharisees.
You took the words out of my mouth, buddy. Like, that's a way of phrasing it in a way that many Christians will understand, but legitimately, I mean this in the most open, kind, and like honest ways I can. But like, is the Seventh-day Adventist Church become like the Pharisees? From my perspective, uncomfortably so.
It's interesting because obviously, I feel like I need to keep prefacing this because I just can see the people typically who agree with me getting angry at this conversation. Like, why are you having this conversation? Well, I'm a devout Adventist, but look at the perspectives we're having here. Look at the conversation we're having.
Like what I was gonna say, like regardless, like if this is an uncomfortable conversation, it's one that needs to be had because if we just sit on the lid of this, eventually it will erupt in a mountain load of nasty things.
That's a really good way of putting it.
But we can't just keep sweeping it under the rug.
Yeah. Like I was saying, I'm a devout Adventist. I believe the doctrines of the church 100%. But I see what you're saying. We have a lot of stuff going on in the church these days that we are becoming a little bit too uncomfortably like the Pharisees. And that's concerning. And we need to seriously... Those are the people Jesus attacked more than anything else because they were the religious hypocrites.
And I have something to share. Like, for me, like, it's a legitimate question, like once I graduated from high school, do I call myself an Adventist? Do I even call myself a Christian? Mm-hmm. Like, I think I still believe in God, but like, there's so much baggage that comes with those labels, to me at least, that like, if people ask me, oh, are you a Christian? Like, just for me,
there's baggage with that term.
It matters so much more in what I do versus like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, I go to church every Sunday or Saturday, and like, why am I going to Southern accent for that? I mean, don't question me on that. But like, yeah, just like, it matters so little to me what people call themselves. Like, oh, you go to church every worship day, and ooh, your character's a little ugly, buddy. I'm gonna.
Well, it goes back kind of to what Gandhi said about Christianity, because Gandhi, who is obviously you could call him a good man, right? He did a lot of great things. He said, I like your Christ. I don't like your Christians. And when you talk about those labels of calling yourself a Christian, your problem that you're expressing is that when you call yourself a Christian, look at how Christians act. And unfortunately, through history, because we're all sinners, and this is going to happen in any religion, I could say the same thing about Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, whatever. It's full of broken people coming together. So you're going to have people who make mistakes. But we can't... I see what you're saying, right? You're nervous about... And we need to change that as a church. We need to change how that label is associated.
And for me, like... This is my perspective. I'm going to preface this with this. But I legitimately expect at least somewhat more from Christians and the church and ... And like, I'm not seeing that, and it's just so completely disappointing. In some cases, I'm seeing worse. I'm like, then what's the point of all this?
Yeah, and that's something, once again, some of you may be listening, it's like, why am I not debating with you more? I'll tell you why. Because that doesn't work. I've tried that with you, and we're just different people. Justin, you're not a debater. So that's why this conversation is going to be good.
Because Payton, like, think about it, the entire point of a debate is to put on a show for other people.
Yeah,
that doesn't actually convince anyone.
Yes, correct. So that's why, if you're wondering why I'm not like nitpicking every point he's making, is because it doesn't work. So that's one of those things, though, is that you talk about the expectations of the church, is where I'm like, okay, we have a little bit of a difference there in the sense that I feel that when we hold up people to that standard, that is part of the problem a little bit. But I see what you're saying, right? Because you look at Christ, you look at the person of Christ in this book, and you say that's not how Christians are acting, and that's your problem, and that's a valid problem.
I mean, I'm not expecting everyone to act like the good man, but like at least a little better than the average.
Yeah.
But in my case, from my perspective, I'm seeing a little, if not considerably worse than the average, which is where my issue lies.
Yeah. I think to try to give maybe some reasoning as to why that is, I think a lot of it has to do with cultural Christianity, as you might call it. Because a lot of the people that you're referring to when you think of those, I bet you they don't. And again, it's not up to me to say where their heart's at, but I think a lot of people get into the cultural Christianity, cultural Catholicism, cultural Adventism, whatever you want to call it, and it becomes something that they just do. They go to church on Sunday, they go to church on Saturday, they just go through the motions. And when it isn't actually in your heart, when you're not actually reading these words and believing them and practicing them, then it's just a religion, and it's not spirituality, and it's not a relationship. And then your actions are going to show that. The problem comes in is when those people attach the name Christian to them. Because if you go around and you don't really believe what this book says, and then you call yourself a Christian, it gives a bad name to Christianity. I think that's the problem. And I can't control people, right? But we can try our very best to make a difference. And you've brought up points already, and I'm sure we'll keep bringing up more points, is how can we fix this? What can we do to mend these wounds?
Can I get a sip? Yeah. I'm sorry about that.
We had an episode about haystacks, by the way, Weekly Word on Wednesday, that you could check out.
I just got a little itch in my throat.
Yeah.
I am your errand boy. I get this for you. You even say, look, I'll get you, like, the drink's all yours, buddy. And now he's just slurping it down.
He's just slurping down all of your drink.
I know, very sad. My heart shattered into 50 million pieces.
Man, they put those lid on tight. But anyway, back to this conversation after that little interlude here. I think it all comes back to, we always put these labels on people.
Yep.
For whatever reason. We always classify people. People always need to be classified. And we never look at people as people.
Yeah.
We look at them as their race, their sexuality, their religion. Oh, you're one of those Christians. Oh, you're black, you got to do these things and do these things. And we attach these stereotypes to these labels. Why?
I think it's human nature. I'm not saying it's good, it's bad. It's obviously bad. We've seen the effects of it. I think what we do as humans is it's so complicated because people are so complicated that we try, naturally the human brain tries to simplify things. And in that process of trying to simplify something, we put people in categories. It's almost like, Connect 4, right? Where you drop the little puck thing in and it goes down and it kind of puts it in different sections. We kind of do that with people. And that is where a lot of our problems come in. Because we have the list of different labels that each person goes in, and then you end up in one of those categories. And then it's blanket, the way you treat these people, the way you treat those people, as opposed to seeing people as individuals.
This reminds me of a quote from a song. You know me, I'm a big hip-hop fan. This is from a song by Logic called Black Spider-Man. And he's talking about equality and issues. And one of the lines in here, it says that I don't want to be black. I don't want to be white. I just want to be a man today. I don't want to be a Christian, Muslim, gay, straight, or bi, see you later, bye. He just wants to be a person. And I think that's how we should view everybody, as people. Not as race.
Yeah.
Not as religion.
Take away the labels, yeah.
Exactly.
And that's actually another thing. I heard this. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so that's why I love podcasting, because I listen to them and I enjoy it too. There was one I was listening to the other day where they were talking about the label of Christian, which we talked about here. And they were pointing out how Christians have stopped labeling themselves as Christians because of what you've expressed, and they've started calling themselves Christ followers because they want to narrow down what they're talking about. That's a huge problem. The fact that the label Christian has been so misused over time that people are now wanting to change the label to Christ follower.
And like this is me expanding on like that. Like I mentioned it offhandedly, but like I think it might be a good thing to hone in on this. Like for me, I legitimately don't see the reason behind the church.
And see, there's another difference, right? That's where I've struggled, because as Christians, right, some of you may hear that and you might have like, I have 1,000 things to say to that. Sure, I have things I want to say to that, but that's not why we're having this conversation. We're having this conversation to have fruitful dialogue. So obviously, I feel there's real importance behind the church. I think the church is the most important thing on the planet, which is actually why I want to have this conversation, because I feel so passionately about it. Because I think in Matthew 24, when Jesus says, go tell the world about me, That's what we should be doing. And unfortunately, what you're voicing is your experience is that we're not doing that. As the church, if we're focusing on all of these controversial hot button issues, that's not telling the world about Christ. That's telling the world about maybe your political or your economic viewpoints or whatever, as opposed to just telling the world about Jesus. We need to focus. The reason they want to call themselves Christ followers is because we need to get back to the path of being Christ followers. But we need to make it so that you can call yourself a Christian and someone knows that means Christ follower, as opposed to that meaning you're a Republican, conservative, da-da-da-da-da-da. It shouldn't come with added labels and baggage.
It's interesting because the Mormons do a similar thing too. Well, I shouldn't say,
LDS. Mormon.
LDS.
Yeah.
The name Mormon has gotten a lot of negative or baggage with it. So a lot of these people of this religion prefer to call themselves members of the Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Or LDS for short.
LDS.
Not LSD.
Not LSD. They're
LDS.
two very different things.
Very different things.
I mean, one of them is something. The other one is a very different something. So
Yeah, that's definitely not what we're here to talk about. But that's exactly right. If you want to go check that out, that's another very fruitful conversation we have. Was a conversation with a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I just got a joke that just popped into my head. If you would be okay.
Yeah, let's spice up the
share.
conversation.
Okay, do you really want me to say it?
Is it PG?
Is it appropriate? Yeah, our podcast is labeled family friendly on all platforms.
Okay,
So
family friendly, yes. Like religion friendly, maybe a little less. It's a joke.
hey, this is an open space, right?
Okay.
Let's just throw a warning. real quick.
Okay.
That's your warning.
As Karl Marx once said, religion is the opiate of the masses. So LSD.
Oh, I see what you're doing.
Yeah, look,
funny.
it popped into my head. Like I distinctly said, this is like it's a thing.
That's another term, by the way, to dissect is religion. Like I mentioned, Jesus attacked the religious people because they were hypocrites. Jesus had the roughest time with religious people. Christianity is not about being religious. It's about a relationship. Unfortunately, most people have turned it into being religious, which is a problem.
I think nowadays religious can be used as a synonym for tradition.
Yeah.
If somebody follows
Right.
something consistently, they're religious about it. Now, an actual religion should be a relationship with Christ, as you mentioned,
Yep.
not following traditions. But nowadays, the two have just become switchable.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's something where was it? It was on the Weekly Word on Wednesday we did with Denelli, which you can also check out. Shameless plug. I referenced in there, we were talking about tradition and cultural wear and how, what's dress code and stuff like that. And I mentioned that I can have my tradition, you can have your tradition. The problem comes in is when your tradition is required to become my tradition or my tradition is required to become your tradition. And that's the problem.
Like going back into the definition of religion, I have another personal take I'm willing to share. Like for me, I wouldn't go as far as label religion as only Christianity because there are other faiths
Of
that
course.
people find fulfillment in, and it leads them to become more Christ-like. Even if they themselves don't explicitly say
Sure.
Christ is my savior. ...
Yeah, that's something that's very true and very sad. To me as a Christian, that kind of hurts. Because I'm not disputing what you're saying. That's very true. There are other people of other religions who, not all of, because I would say some of the core tenets of Christianity include believing in Jesus Christ as your Savior. So that's the most important thing of being a Christian. But when it comes to the actions, yes. Other faiths, sometimes, unfortunately, for Christianity, they act it out better than we do. But they're still missing that core of Christ, which is why I'm not a Buddhist, right? Because it's missing the core of Christ. But the actions speak louder than words to the outside world, and that's the problem.
Yep. I hear there was a joke that was made in Bible class. It was on the topic of sick people. We were learning about different worldviews.
And by sick, we mean, people often call it sick. It's pronounced sick, but that's going to confuse people who don't know. So sick or
it's
sick.
Sikh or sick. Yeah. They prefer to be called sick. But then somebody made a joke. It's like, wow, these sick people are better Christians than Christians are.
Mercy.
And that should be saying something.
That should be like a dagger to all of us Christians. And this is a conversation, we spent a lot of time talking about the problems, and we've talked about some solutions. You said the church putting out a statement, and that'll get maybe the ball rolling. One thing I would say is that in my experience with somebody putting out statements, it kind of can cause more division if done wrong. I think, that's good. That's a good start. I think another thing we could do is also, let's just do it.
Yeah.
And we talked about this too. Just do it. I need to just go into the church every Sabbath and act out the things we're talking about here. That will make the biggest difference. And I hope that we can get enough people doing that.
I have a specific one that would be a little bit more than just a statement
for sure
regarding that issue. Donating, or like from the church, a donation to I think it's the Trevor Foundation or Trevor Hotline. It's basically for suicidal LGBTQ plus people.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Like, I feel like that'd be a very good symbol, or at least like say we're actually serious about this.
Yeah. That's tough. And, we kind of talked about this. There are going to be people in the church who are going to disagree with that. I personally don't have any problem with what you just said. Because once again, we're not suggesting compromising values by that. We're saying, hey, yeah, sure, maybe we disagree with you, but we still care about you, and we're going to donate to this foundation that says we care about your life and your life matters. And that would be a good step for the church.
I'm going to say this, though. Another hot take, if you will. Like, I'm okay with disagreements, but if there's a person who's willing to say, it's okay with me if these kids die, because they're then
that's wrong.
I have very serious issues.
I have very serious issues with that person too, especially if that person would call him or herself a Christian. That is not what Christ would do.
Because like the entire point of this hotline I bring up is to keep these kids from killing themselves. It's the suicide hotline.
Yeah, and every Christian should get behind that, people. Every single one of us. And if we don't, that's your problem.
Yeah, that is a personal issue that you should go get help.
Yeah, because if you want somebody to die,
that is
because you don't agree with their lifestyle,
messed up.
Guess what? I don't agree with my own lifestyle because I'm a sinner. I make mistakes. That doesn't mean that I want myself dead, because I think every human being deserves the right to live and deserves the right to be loved, right?
Yep.
So just because, and guess what? We all disagree with everybody. One of the things I've loved about this conversation so far is that each and every one of us have disagreed a little bit. The way you phrase things is different than the way I phrase things. The way you phrase things is different than the way I phrase things. That's good, because that's what makes the world go round. And if you say you want someone dead because they disagree with you, that's your problem. That's a whole nother mess. I don't even know what to say to that. That's just,
That is really disgusting.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever experienced someone actually saying that. I thank the Lord that I've never actually heard a Christian say that they wanted people dead. Not to say it doesn't exist, because I think it probably does happen, unfortunately. But I would hope that that's in the minority.
I feel like I need to clarify, at least for an explanation, like what specifically I take issue with in the church. I'm not saying my specific church. Would it be okay if I gave the exact one I go to? I'm not sure. Would that be doxing?
It's up to you. It's up to you.
Like, I'm not exclusively saying it's the Kent Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm not exclusively saying it's the Washington Conference. I'm not exclusively saying it's Auburn Adventist Academy. I'm referring to the church as an institution, and do I need to explain what that is, or would you like me to?
That's something you can explain your take on it, and we can kind of we all have experience in this, and I think we have different perspectives, because the church as an organization is an organization.
What I mean by institution is just the mixture of like just the church culture, and that's both in church and outside, in schooling. That's a mixture of like how like procedures are done, like a bias, like in a certain case of doing this or doing that or doing whatever. As it's mostly those two. I'm trying in my head to figure out what else is part of an institution. People as well as in like worldview, specifically in terms of the institution, kind of like that. And I guess another way of phrasing it very crudely would be stereotypes, but not quite that, definitely not. But it's a very, very, very rough approximation. But like by institution, I'm not saying one specific person. I'm not saying one specific church. It's a very broad statement.
I'm glad you clarify that too, because we've been saying the church probably 100 times already during this recording. And when we say the church, we're having to make generalizations in order to address the points. We're not calling out a specific person.
And like, I hope it's not just brushed off my experiences like, oh, it's because of one person. Oh, it's because of my interaction with some people.
Of course.
Because I'll admit, when I voice my doubts with a couple of people, they said, oh, just go to a different church. Oh, it's because of your interaction with this one person. Oh, like, that's very dismissive, and like, that's just demeaning. Oh, what I see as my valid issues with the church. Oh, it's just because this one person. Don't worry, honey. You're so good with the church. Head pat, head pat, head pat. Yeah. Your opinions don't matter. Like, that's what it feels like a lot.
That's interesting to point out, because we talked about this with a few different things in my home church, at least. We've talked about how to deal with stuff like this. I know there's a member of our church who talks about grief counseling. This sounds slightly off topic. I promise it ties in. He said that one time somebody lost a family member and he didn't know how to address it, so he just went the other way. That's the point of this conversation, is so that people in the church don't do the same thing with this situation. If someone expresses, like you've expressed, of your problems at the church, we shouldn't pat you on the head and say it's okay. Because the reason people do that is because they don't know how to respond. We need to know how to respond to that. We need to be better as the church.
I feel like a decent response is, it pains me to hear you say that. You have valid reasons to do so. If you could explain to me why, so we can improve ourselves, feel free to continue your path in life.
Yeah.
I may hope that you come back, but if that is not what your calling in life is, then I wish you the best.
Write that down, everybody. Because I have no problem with that exact statement right there. And if that is what someone in your position would feel better hearing, and that someone in my position has no problem saying, let's do it.
Because like,
let's make it happen.
In all honesty, like the way my life's going, like I'm going to be living with my siblings in California.
Yeah.
Probably, at least. I'm going to, I know for a fact, about honestly the last thing I want for college is going to an Adventist college. And just like that, my path is exiting the Adventist bubble.
Yeah. And like you kind of mentioned in that statement, obviously the church hopes you come back. I hope you come back. But if you don't, it's not my place to judge you. It's not my place to attack you. And I trust that it's not up to me to make your decisions.
And
right?
like my good friend, my good bud, like you mentioned earlier that it's really good to have an outside opinion. Like legitimately, like I feel like I'd be a good outside opinion for that. So,
yeah.
Like just like call me up, buddy.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what we're looking for here. When we started Faith Talk, I think we had these conversations like, we got to get people on here. We got to get discussion going.
That was the whole goal of this podcast, was to have these conversations like that need to be had.
Because like if I feel like my opinion wouldn't be heard, I just write this off as like an echo chamber. Like, oh, okay, I'm not being heard. I'm just being talked over. I'll walk away.
Yeah, and that's why I hope this episode is shared around. And I hope that all of us have come across the way we want to come across, obviously. And I hope that this can just start discussion and bring attention. One of the things in my roles, as I've gotten more involved in my church community, I've realized these issues are the ones that are most affecting the youth. All of this church hurt, all these controversial things. And this is the way we need to address them. These conversations have to be had.
I have another thing I'd like to share. And again, this is my personal view.
Yeah.
Legitimately, the more I feel like I've disentangled myself, for lack of a better phrase, I can find from the church and like the core, not the core teaching of like loving others, but just the traditions and everything else, I've found the more effective I've become at showing kindness towards others.
Mercy.
So
yeah. That's hard. That's hard to hear as a Christian because it tells us that we're messing up. But of course we are. That's what I have to remind myself, is I could listen to this and get down and down and down. But of course we are. We're sinners. We're going to make mistakes. And I pray that the church will do better. I know that you and I have had different experiences in the church, and Justin's had different experiences in the church. I hope that we're the future of the church. We're young. That's the other cool thing, is that we're all young. And I think those have been some of our most entertaining episodes of the podcast, are with our peers, because we're the future of the church. How we handle these issues today will affect the future of the church tomorrow.
I got something to say. I find it ironic that the people who could change the church most for the good I see, like my personal interpretation of it, are those being pushed away the most. Like people who've been wronged by the church, who've been taught just things that are antithetical to them, and just like all these possible sources of just dissenting voices, differing worldviews, and everything else, ... They're being pushed away, and honestly, I see myself as one of those.
Yeah. Mercy, 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 mercy. The church needs to hear this. Isn't our goal to get more people in the church, to win souls, not push people away? Did Jesus push anybody away? No. I love the exchange of Jesus when he invites everybody over to Matthew, the tax collector's house. And then the Pharisees come to the house and say, "Why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners?" And he goes, "It's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick." We're supposed to invite everybody into the church. Jesus didn't exclude anyone from that table. In fact, the people that weren't directly invited were the ones who were the religious hypocrites who were all on their high horses.
And I'm going to say something. I feel like Sorry about that. That was the I can't name the establishment, but the fast food chain known for the dong sound effect as well as tacos.
Pastor
Like,
K's
it's coming
favorite
back up.
restaurant.
It's coming back up. But anyhow, I'm gonna share another thing.
Mm-hmm.
Legitimately, like when it comes to just religion at all, I think the best thing that the church / Auburn civically has done has been like just saying, oh, here are some other religions. Like we're trying to remove as much bias as we can from our. Because thank you, Pastor Chris, by the way. That's been a spectacular thing. I really enjoyed that, and like it kind of gave me a little bit of hope. I'm like, maybe there is a little something here. Maybe not right now, and honestly, not enough for me as is for me to be satisfied.
Yeah.
But like it's kind of a light right there.
Yeah.
Shining in the darkness, if you will. And like I know that's me being hyperbolic and poetic, but I'm in drama literature, so I have the right to be.
I like that. That's a positive point. This has been a pretty deep conversation and a very important conversation, but that's good, right? And like you mentioned, maybe you're not ready yet. Maybe you need a little bit of breathing room, but we talked about other religions, and I loved that conversation too, right? I think we all really enjoyed that unit in our senior Bible class talking about other religions, having conversations like these where we get to address these differences as opposed to just talking about our similarities all the time.
Because I'll admit, to a point in the preceding years, it felt like this Bible class at all, honestly, throughout my entire like waking memory, it felt a lot like an echo chamber. It really did.
Yeah.
So I'm like just hearing, not even just like not quite dissenting voice, but like, oh yeah, here's some different viewpoints on the world. We won't be able to properly express all of it across as is, but like here's like a member of that faith. You can ask them questions, and like just other people exist who aren't Adventists, and like that's been an awesome thing to see.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we all have our own worldview. That's what part of makes us unique. Excuse me. That's part of what makes us unique is we all have our own worldview. We all have our own opinions. We all have our own way of viewing what the world is. We all have our own opinion of what the world should be and what the world looks like. And it's interesting because a lot of people can go through their whole life without viewing the world through somebody else's lenses. They'll only see it through their lenses. And once you switch out your lenses and see it through somebody else's lenses, you're going to see a whole new world. It is insane.
It's a whole new... Oh, Disney.
Copyright.
I'll stop you right there.
The mouse.
You know what's cool about this conversation too is that I think often, speaking from personal experience, as I kind of know the type of people that often we've had a problem with in this conversation, including myself, I've had a problem with them, is that I think a lot of Christians are afraid to have these conversations because they're worried by having them, they're somehow compromising their principles. And that's what I found is that, wait a minute, I can have these conversations without compromising my principles. And that's what Christians need to be reminded of, and I hope that can encourage some of you to have these conversations.
Like, coming from the other side, so to speak, of that conversation, it's a lot of just the fear of being canceled by...
Of course.
By the surrounding Christians around, like, oh, if I say something, am I gonna be like, am I a nail sticking out to be hammered down by the church? Oh boy, I can't wait to like do, yeah.
And that's a problem. That's funny too that you keep using the word canceled because often the Christians are the ones these days talking about worried about being canceled. That's a whole nother conversation. Well, you just started here, folks, that we sometimes do the canceling.
I mean, like,
that's a problem.
I mean, look back to the 80s when like Christians tried to cancel babysitters for being demonic. Like that was a thing, if you remember.
What?
There was a really big scandal about it.
I haven't heard that.
Like no. Like I'm not sure I'm getting all the details correct, but like there was like a Christian moms movement, and like they were investigating babysitters for like satanic influences. Like it was a relatively big thing, and like yes, there was abuses going on, but it wasn't satanic at all. It was more of just like okay, this is gonna sound horrific, like regular old child abuse.
Oh, gosh.
And I know that sounds horrific, but
good old regular old child abuse.
Yes, I know it sounds horrific, but like,
well, I see what you're saying.
Like there's also like trying to cancel like rock and roll or like just anything else that seemed relatively new. Was it's from the devil. Like it's not a new thing.
I think that there's a key here that I've learned in having these conversations, because I force myself to have these conversations. I've not done so well sometimes. I hope I'm doing better. But the key is know your core principles and don't go over extreme. Like rock and roll. Let's use rock and roll for example.
Bro, it's cool.
Does anything in the Bible say that you can't do rock and roll?
Oh, Jesus.
No?
Jesus detested guitars,
right.
don't you know?
So if it's not in there, it's not a core principle. Don't make that your fight.
Like, it is hardly a hill to die upon. It's
Yeah,
not,
exactly.
there is no hill. There is
Exactly.
nothing. There's not even a bump in the ground. There's not even like an ant. No, nothing. It is perfectly flat ground.
Exactly. That's exactly
It
right.
is-
It's not
is-
a hill to die upon.
You know what would be
It
hilarious?
is flatter than Nebraska.
You know what would be hilarious? Absolutely hilarious, right? If we get to heaven, and the Bible says there's going to be music everywhere, right? What if it's rock and roll?
I am down. I am so down.
By the way, if
It's
you
like Jesus shredding it.
If you want a good Christian rock band, check out Skillet, by the way. Fantastic. But that's exactly. I love how you put that. It's not the hill to die on. We as Christians need to stop dying on hills that aren't the hills to die on. Christ died on the hill of Calvary, and that's the gospel message. Stop dying on other hills.
Okay, complete side note. Like, growing up, I would always mix up Calvary and Calvary, like the horses.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
of course.
I'm like,
Of course,
hold
yeah.
up.
Absolutely. All of us did.
Wait, like the hill of horses? Wait a second. Wait, no,
Yeah.
not even the hill of horses. The hill of, like, men with swords on horses? Like, is that what it was? like the pokey people?
You can just imagine all of them on horses with like crossed swords.
Yep.
Calvary. I mean, Calvary. That thing.
Something.
And that's where Jesus died, guys. The end.
Imagine, like, that's the final, like, words of the Bible. Instead of, like, amen, it's just, oh, yeah, Jesus died.
The end.
Do you remember that time when Kabanji gave us a quiz? The last question was, what's the last word of the Bible? But in different translations of Revelation, it's a different word.
Really?
Yeah, that was, yeah. I had to challenge him on that one. That was fine.
I always thought it was just amen.
Yeah, same.
Depends on the translation.
Really? So, like, what are some other ones?
Let me see what the Old King James says here. If I turn in my Old King James, for those of you who aren't watching the video, this one's the one with all the ye's and stuff.
Oh, the old
So
English from Shakespeare.
This one ends in amen.
Uh-huh.
But I don't think the NLT does.
Really?
Yeah, I'd have to look it up, but pretty sure that's a weird side tangent to get into.
Like, I'm okay with it, though.
Yeah, side tangents are good, right? Sometimes that's another piece of advice too. If you have these conversations and they get really, really heated or something, throw in some comedy. That's another thing Justin's really good at. Justin's very funny.
But on the topic of ending things here, I think we've come to a good ending spot in our podcast, and our time is just about up. So we want to thank you so much for watching. Hopefully, we'll catch you on the next one.
Part two.
Maybe there'll be a part two. Yeah,
Maybe.
we'll leave that possibility open because God isn't into closing doors, right? That's something I've learned.
That's true.
I mean, I'd like to share one last thing.
Okay.
Of, like, taking on a bit from that inspiration from Pastor Crystalline and just from my own family, like, going into college, I think I'm legitimately gonna study into the Buddhist traditions. Like, I don't think I will ever fully believe, oh yes, to achieve nirvana, I must follow the Eightfold Path. More just common application to my life of just doing that.
And that is a good point to end on, the idea of don't close those doors. Investigate other worldviews. Learn what other people think. You will become a better person for it. And I think that's what we've learned from this conversation.
And
Be
also,
open.
Also, anyone at Auburn, like, if you want a differing viewpoint.
Yeah, it's been an awesome conversation. Thanks, Justin, for joining us.
Thank you so much for joining us, dude. Peace.